I still remember the sound like a giant ripping a page out of a book. Only the book was my front porch. That first slam of metal on wood is what woke me up for good. I'm Ethan Reed. I built that porch with my own 2 hands over 3 summers, cutting joists in the light of my truck bed, soaking my shirt in sweat and pride. 3 summers and a lifetime of small fixes later, and a bulldozer shows up and the world tilts. People expect a dramatic hook. Here it is. One woman in a red blazer decided my life and my house could be rearranged on her schedule. That's how fast a neighborhood can get pulled into a private war. Someone with a clipboard, charm, and an idea that rules are what you make them. The first act is simple. She pushed, I pushed back, and then everything escalated. For years, our street was the kind of place where people watered their lawns and waved when you walked past. I drank coffee on that porch. I painted the trim. I mended a neighbor's fence once when his hinge came loose. I wasn't looking for trouble. We moved to Maple Hollow because it felt safe. Maple trees, good sidewalks, and an HOA that, on paper, promised to keep the place tidy. What none of us read closely was who got to decide what tidy meant. Enter Marla Whitcomb. She ran for the HOA board like some run for office with a smile and a plan. Marla loved order the way others love stories. She read bylaws the way most of us read novels, except she was editing them as she went. She started with little things: a letter about paint color, a note about an unapproved mailbox, and the notes piled up. At first I figured it was petty. Then her notices became inspections in the night, then contractors on our driveway. I wish I could point to one clear moment where I knew she was out to get me, but it was more like a pattern. A contractor I hired showed up with an invoice for right-of-way remediation. A permit bore a copied signature. A neighbor who once greeted me pretended not to know me at meetings. Stack enough of those tiny betrayals, and they form motive, control. Marla wanted the neighborhood shaped to her taste and to her benefit. Confronting her didn't go like a movie. There was an HOA meeting with stale coffee and her PowerPoint. I stood up and asked about the permit she'd waved at on the screen. She smiled a too sweet smile and said, "Procedures were followed, Ethan. Maybe you missed the memo." It's uncanny how polite language can erase you. That night, I stared at the porch and felt anger, not loud fury, but a slow, building determination. Then the bulldozer came. No warning, no call, just the sound of a machine chewing through the slats I'd sanded by hand. I ran out barefoot, dust in my hair, and all I could get out was, "What are you doing?" One of the men pointed to a paper nailed to a post. Order to remove unauthorized structure. Marla stood there with her clipboard and said, "We act in the community's best interest." She didn't look me in the eye. That was the turning point. Papers that look official can be anything. They can be forged, misfiled, or manufactured. I started digging. I went to the county office, sifted through permit books, scanned PDFs with odd timestamps. I called a contractor who'd been on my driveway and asked where his check came from. He hemmed and hawed, and then admitted the work orders had come through a company he'd barely heard of. I found invoices routed through shell companies and signatures that didn't quite match. Little things: a stamp date that made no sense, an email chain with gaps added up. Each discovery felt like turning a new page in a book you wish you hadn't opened. There's a humility that comes when your back's to the wall. You stop shouting and start collecting evidence. My nights turned into lamplit stacks of paper and coffee rings. I called Collins, a lawyer with a tie that never loosened, and he did what lawyers do. He looked for leverage. The word forgery landed in our paperwork like a hammer. It made people pay attention. We served notices, filed motions, and slowly the machinery that chewed my porch began to creak. Along the way, a few neighbors quietly agreed to talk: the landscaper who'd never shown up for invoices, a woman who'd been threatened with fines for a tiny garden statue, a man who'd been paid to sign something he didn't read. Those conversations stitched a pattern together. People are made of habits and alliances. Marla had allies who benefited from her version of order: landscapers who got contracts, contractors who received steady work, neighbors who liked uniform yards. When the first hearing arrived, half the room believed tidy curb appeal was worth any cost. That's when the undercurrent rose into open conflict. In the witness stand, I saw faces I'd waved to for years, and some looked ashamed to be there. After the hearing, the neighborhood conversations changed from whispers to arguments. Some people stuck by Marla. They said she'd kept the streets orderly and feared change. Others, Those who'd gotten notices or watched the pattern unfold became louder. We started holding small meetings in my garage, maps, copies of documents, a whiteboard. It felt like organizing a small revolution, not with pitchforks but with evidence and patience. That grassroots energy mattered more than I expected. A few neighbors who had been silent finally stepped forward to testify. It wasn't dramatic, just honest people saying what they'd seen. Court felt like theater and arithmetic. A paper trail here, an affidavit there, testimony that aligned into a pattern. Collins called witnesses a municipal clerk who noted the odd upload times, a contractor who traced payments back to a shell company, and a longtime neighbor who described being threatened with fines for stepping out of line. When Collins held up a scan permit and a handwriting expert testified the letters didn't match, you could feel the tension. Marla sat very still. At one point she flared a clipped, "You have no proof," and Collins answered with a stack of canceled checks and email headers. For those who believe power shields them, silence is loud. The hush in the courtroom was the best sound I'd heard in months. Victory wasn't cinematic. The judge ordered restitution, not enough to replace the years the porch represented, but enough to start. Marla was removed from the board, her honorary powers rescinded, and she faced penalties that cracked her public image. The neighborhood exhaled, and yet the ending felt partial. When something you built by hand is taken down by order, the scar stays even after the nails hold again. The third act is the rebuild and the reckoning. We poured a new foundation the spring after the verdict. People came by with tools, some faces different, some the same, and we hammered the new porch into place. I didn't rebuild it exactly the way it was. You don't put the same boards back if they once splintered under a bulldozer's teeth. I built it sturdier, simpler, with the same crooked charm. I wanted a porch that would stand for me, not one that invited someone to decide its fate. Now, when I run my hand along that rail at dusk, I think about how power works in small towns and cities alike. People who wave clipboards like scepters, folks who equate order with morality, those are dangerous combinations. There's a lesson about vigilance. Ask who benefits and why rules exist. And a messier truth. Communities often choose comfort over justice, and justice is rarely flashy. It's paperwork, long hearings, and a handful of people willing to disagree. I won't romanticize it. It was messy, expensive, and exhausting. But standing up matters. If one person decides to be the friction, the one who slows the wheel, it gives others permission to do the same. Maple Hollow won't be perfect, no place is, but when the late light hits the new boards, I hear the echo of that first terrible sound and smile, because it taught me who I was. So tell me your take. Have you ever seen rules used to shove someone out, or watched a community pick convenience over fairness? Leave a comment. Was I right to fight, or did I pick a battle I couldn't afford? Hit like if you think rules should protect people, not profits, and share this with someone who's ever stood on a porch and felt the ground shift beneath their feet.